My name is Jennifer Mandel, and I'm the program director of the College Counseling and Access Department here at UCLA Extension. And this is our second annual In Conversation Summer Speaker Series. This webinar brings together college admissions professionals, thought leaders like Ron, and experts in the college counseling field for a wonderful conversation, a lively conversation about the state of admissions today. I'd like to thank the Dean's Office for supporting this free series as part of the UCLA X Open, a no-cost personal enrichment and professional development initiative offered here by us at UCLA.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. So we're so glad to have you. I know everybody's joining us from lots of different time zones. I know some places, Ron, for you in New York, it's like 8 o'clock at night. And if you're coming from other parts of the world, we're just really glad to have you here. My name is Cyndy McDonald. I'm an instructor in the UCLA College Counseling Certificate Program, and I teach in the Inclusive College Counseling program course. I teach an essay boot camp, and I also teach finalizing college admissions. I've been a practitioner in college admissions working with high school students for over 30 years. So I'm so pleased to be here today and have this conversation with you, Ron. Let me introduce you. Those of you who may not know, Ron is an author. He's also a journalist. He wrote The Opposite of Spoiled: Raising Kids Who Are Grounded, Generous, and Smart About Money. He's also written the book, The Price You Pay for College. And you can see I actually have this right on my desk here. This is one of my standards that I use. And since 2008, Mr. Lieber has been the Your Money columnist for the New York Times. And before then, he wrote the Green Thumb personal finance column for the Wall Street Journal. So no big journalistic kudos to your name at all, Ron, right? So glad to have you here. And we have so much to talk about with most recent news coming down from the Supreme Court. And I saw your two articles last week on this issue. So to get started, can you let people know how you came about writing about paying for college as a journalist? That's not necessarily, when you go to journalism school, that's not what you come out saying, oh, you're what I'm going to write about. So how did that happen for you?
Yeah, it's true. Nobody goes to college or starts in journalism, thinking that they're going to be a personal finance journalist. So it was sort of happy accident. And first of all, thank you for having me. I see some familiar names out there in the attendee list. Thank you so much for coming and listening on what at least is here in Truro, Massachusetts, is a beautiful summer night. I see an orange sun right outside my window. So I'll watch the sunset as I watch all of you. So this is personal for me. I grew up in Chicago, oldest of 3 kids, went to a private school. My parents were doing all right, just all right enough to, be able to pay tuition in full for 3 kids, back in the early 80s in Chicago. And then our family kind of hit the skids. My parents broke up. It was a long, drawn out divorce, and my father lost his job right at the beginning of that process. So we were sort of thrown into the shoals of what passed for the financial aid system back then in K-12 schools. And it effectively involved, the board of trustees sitting in judgment on whether the Lieber kids were going to be evicted for their lack of ability to pay. And, the fact that I was able to stay there is still the most incredible act of generosity that anyone has ever showed to me. So that stuck with me. 4 or 5 years later, same thing, right? We didn't have enough money for me to go to the colleges that I wanted to attend. Private schools back in 1988, the college counseling offices did not know a lot about the need-based financial aid system. Thankfully, John McClintock, my college counselor at the Francis Parker School in Chicago, knew where to send me. He had the name of a guy who knew what to do. We called him up, and there was no such thing as a independent educational consultant at the time. I mean, there were some private college counselors out there, but it was a very small niche. Some of you might have been practicing back then, but if so, you were pretty green, right? And so we didn't really know what this was. We called this guy, and he said, "Yeah, come see me on this, address, Hinman Street in Evanston, Illinois, and bring me $50 in cash." And so we go up there, and we pay his fee, and he ushers us in through the side door of the Northwestern University Financial Aid Office. And wouldn't you know it, this was the assistant dean of financial aid at Northwestern, who had this side hustle going on where he would usher, needy families in after hours and take their cash and explain to them how the system worked. And it turns out that wherever you turn around as an emerging adult, there is a grown-up who knows the answer to all of the questions. And once I got into Amherst Early Decision and got a great financial aid package and, became buddies with the dean of financial aid there, St. Joe, as we refer to him, Joe Paul Case, who I'm still in touch with to this day, that sort of was kind of cemented in my brain, right? This idea that there was a system out there, multiple systems that were complex, and there were always grownups around who could help you if you just found them and maybe slipped a little cash across the table to them. And so it's probably not a big surprise that I grew up to be a personal finance journalist, right? My beat essentially is beating the system. And that's what I learned from that guy at Northwestern. And the kinds of stories that really appeal to me, right? If you can imagine a Venn diagram of things that cost a lot of money, right? High expense, a hidden system working behind the scenes that's very complex and opaque, and then a whole bunch of emotions that get in the way of sound decision-making, right? So at the dead center of that Venn diagram is saving and paying for college. And it sort of crystallized for me around about 2008, 2009, when a bunch of people started, washing out of private colleges as undergraduates with bachelor's degrees and over $100,000 in debt. Now, the system's changed some since then. But when I realized what was going on and the kinds of complicated, problematic emotional decision-making that was taking place around this incredibly important purchase, I was sort of hooked, and I basically haven't stopped writing about it since. I write about everything under the sun that hits you at the wallet for the New York Times, but I've been more or less obsessed for the last 10 or 15 years with the question of what to pay for college, which is a value question and also a values question in terms of your own complex family's financial decision or situation and the decision-making around that. So that's kind of how I got there.
Wow. Well, and that explains why transparency in the cost of education in college is such an important factor for you. Because, it used to be when we as college counselors or advisors would talk to people and say, oh, well, paying for college is like buying a new car. Now it's paying for college is like buying a new house. In some places, people are going to spend more money than they actually do on their house. So having that transparency is so important because it is one of the biggest investments families are going to make, whether they're first generation or multi-generation. So what have you found as you've been on this mission and working on this value? What have you found in terms of transparency and college costs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you framed it the way that you did, because as the numbers have gotten ever higher, and the importance of this purchase has certainly not diminished in terms of, what the trajectory of any given 18-year-old will be. I think it's defensible to say that this is the biggest financial decision that your family will ever make. And so how can it be that you don't get to know what the price is until after you've paid $1,000 in application fees or whatever it is, run a super intense admission gauntlet, filled out a bunch of forms, and then, maybe you've got a handful of weeks in March and April to make up your mind when you finally get the price quote. This doesn't make any sense. And, the government's tried to step in with these net price calculators, but I think we all know that they're pretty accurate, maybe 70 or 80% of the time. And, pretty accurate, meaning maybe they're off by $10,000, right? And the rest of the time, they just can't handle complex situations, right? And that's before we begin talking about merit aid, which, anything goes, right? And it just does not seem defensible to me that people can't get a guaranteed price up front. And, families who approach this for the first time, who have been innocently working in consumer-facing industries, right? The parents have, where there's always price transparency, arrive at this juncture. And as you know, they cannot believe, and in fact, you, the professionals, probably have trouble persuading them how different it is from the way it was when they were doing it 25 or 30 years ago. And they're astounded and then angry about the fact that there's so much flim-flam going on with the pricing. And so, on behalf of my readers, who I consider my customers, I'm trying to stand up for them in public and say, there must be a way to do this differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is. It's like the only thing that we do. I've always compared it to a big black box. Like you close your eyes, you hold out your hands, and then you say, oh, well, tell me how much I'm going to pay. You would never do that for a house. You'd never do that for a car. Why are we expected to do that for a college education? Not for one, but for multiple of our children. So you bring up the topic of merit aid. How does that fit into this? And where does that create the difference in this?
Well, so the black box of merit aid was particularly interesting to me because the demographic of the subscriber base at the New York Times and the demographic of people who tend to buy hardcover nonfiction books about parenting is right in the sort of a donut hole, as many people refer to it now, right? Where at a private college or even at, a flagship state university where, all in, the list prices are now topping $30,000 in many states per year. These are families who on paper do not qualify for much, if any, need-based aid, but absolutely do not have the ability to write a $30,000, let alone $80,000 check to these schools. And so, behind closed doors, the admissions officers and the financial aid officers, who, by the way, earn less than a lot of these donut hole families, but nevertheless, they need to make their class each year. They referred to this as felt need, right? The need that you cannot demonstrate on paper, but you feel acutely. And if you're earning $250,000 or $300,000 a year as a household, maybe you should have saved, a whole lot of money, but maybe you didn't arrive at that point until 5 years ago because you were clambering your way up the career ladder. Or maybe there was a parent who stepped out of the workplace, to take care of small children. Or maybe you took all of those earnings and spent them on expensive real estate and high real estate taxes in a high income tax state, so your kids could be well educated enough to have a shot at these schools in the first place, right? So, we run around sort of casting aspersions, and, Dave Ramsey's on the radio telling people that, they haven't saved enough and they're overspending. But the fact of the matter is that there may be all sorts of reasons why you don't have a six-figure amount in a 529 account per student, right? And so you arrive at this juncture, and even people with the ability to pay may not have the willingness, right? And so what we've seen now, because of all those factors, is that all but, let's call it 40, of the most rejected colleges and universities in the land now have to discount for the affluent, because otherwise they're not going to be able to fill their class. And so, once the market dynamics became apparent to me, I wanted to know how it works. And it turns out that nobody wants to talk about how it works. And often, although not always, it's pretty difficult to predict. And the schools don't really want to talk about it because they want to, maintain this perception that, any merit aid that you do get is a reward for, excellent student behavior. And it's a pat on the head to the parents who have raised this meritorious child. And if you get anything at all, it should feel like a big fat trophy. And don't ask any questions, because if you do ask questions, you might find out that you got lowballed.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I remember sitting in a financial aid conference, and it was when this is all what we're referring to as strategic enrollment management and using algorithms. I remember when it became popular with baseball. Well, they do the same thing with college admissions, right? And watching us get a grid and realizing that my low income kids were not going to be able to get into this very well-known private school because they weren't going to have the combination of the academic and the income available. And basically the colleges couldn't afford them. And so that's one of the dynamics that we're facing is that. But now with the Supreme Court rulings that just came down, the last week, that's going to have an impact. So what do you see as the impact on the rulings on race and admissions, and then on the student debt? I mean, we had this huge proposal to forgive, student loans to a certain level, and now that's all been shut down. So what do you see from your experiences the impacts might be?
Sure. So I'd say several things about that. First of all, to the extent that I have an area of expertise, it's mostly around money and merit aid and less so around admissions and admissions strategy. But I will tell you this, several weeks ago, before the Supreme Court decision came down, I got my hands on the strategy booklet from a small liberal arts college that you all will have heard of and would be very happy if your clients went to. And this was a 30-page document talking about all of the things that might have to change and new things they might need to try to preserve, the diversity of the undergraduate population that existed. And what was apparent to me was that nothing at these places right now is happening without multiple lawyers looking over everybody's shoulder. And the reason why that is that, so many of these name brand schools have a high enough self-regard that they think they're going to be the next one to be sued. And they might be, right? I mean, there's a non-zero chance that any of these places could be the next target. So they don't want to telegraph any changes. They don't want to be writing things down. They want to be speaking in the conditional, right? Might, could, and not so much, will. And also everybody's sort of looking around over their shoulder to see, what everybody else is going to do. So all of the people who were, sort of out there punditting, being pundits, making predictions about what is or is not going to happen. I don't have all that much confidence myself, but I know what's going to happen on the admissions front. And let me just say that I've got a rising high school senior in my household. So this, I've got some personal stakes in this, but I don't think it's clear at all, on the admissions side, exactly what will happen. And I think we're just going to need to wait and see. And I think, some schools will be able to maintain the diversity of their undergraduate populations. And some of them, I think, will, see their numbers, fall off a cliff. But I don't know that we can predict, who's going to do what. I think it depends who behind the scenes is going to sort of, silently break the law without any winks or anything being written down, and who's going to try and stick to the letter of the law, but be really creative in how they change their recruiting strategy, and who is just not going to get it done. And, it's hard to say. On the money side, I'll just say one thing. The fact that these schools can't offer guaranteed pricing as a general rule is not going to help them maintain a diverse population, right? If ever there was a time to say, okay, we're finally going to tell you what's going to cost, it's the point at which Black and brown people feel like they are no longer welcome or wanted, or are worried about, sort of where they stand in this process. I mean, if not now, when, right? If not now, when? So you asked about the student loan decision. I guess what I would say about that is, in the 15 years, since I started writing about student loans for the New York Times, there actually have been a lot of positive developments. When I first got started, it was possible for a teenager to get a private loan on top of their federal loans without a grown-up co-signing it. And, these kids would wash out of, the NYUs and the USCs and the Northeasterns and the Tulanes with, $120,000 in undergraduate debt with no grown-up involved. And these financial aid offices were, see no evil, hear no evil, with the award letters basically putting it in their hands and, letting them get into that kind of trouble. Now, if you graduate as an undergraduate with the maximum amount of federal student loans, you will have $31,000 in student loan debt. That's, roughly $300 a month. If you can't afford it, you can get in one of many income-based repayment programs. And the Biden administration is trying actively to improve those to bring the payments down even more. So I don't worry so much about the student loan debt of people who graduate from nonprofit colleges and universities. What I do worry about is the people who are not ready for college, or who, for whatever reason, can't make it through, and they end up with $15,000 or $20,000 in debt. They drop out or flunk out midway through, and then they have the debt but no degree. Those are the people that I worry about the most on the undergraduate level. So I think I hit all the aspects of the question there, but
you did very well. Well, and that brings up a whole nother point too about profit colleges and nonprofit. And also because of COVID, we've seen a increase in the acceptability of online programs. And I know a lot of universities, especially with the number of students that are going to be attending those institutions, that number is going down. And so colleges are now having to find other ways to reach potential students. And COVID really accelerated that. And so you have the online options too. And so looking at the different choices between profit, nonprofit, online, other things, are you seeing trends in those directions?
Not so much. The question that kept coming up in 2020, particularly in the fall of 2020, there are all these people out there in the world, and it's not just people, on the far right who feel like these schools are indoctrination factories of wokeness, but there's all sorts of people out there who are rooting for the higher education industry to get its comeuppance. They think it's overpriced, feeding off the government trough, getting away with all sorts of things that, the laws and public policy should not allow. Is Harvard a hedge fund, or is it a charity, right? All those sorts of things.
The same for the College Board.
Right. And so, my inbox was just stuffed in the summer and fall of 2020 with all sorts of people hoping that, this was the moment when what happened to the music industry in 1996 would happen to colleges and universities. And I just never bought it, and I don't buy it now. And the reason why I don't is because, for better or for worse, for middle-class teenagers and above on the socioeconomic ladder, they have come to expect, and we have come to regard, residential, in-person, residential undergraduate education as a rite of passage such that it almost has become an entitlement. How many 18-year-olds can any of us name who, in the wake of COVID and the schools supposedly getting better at all this, have actually enrolled full-time at an online-only college or university? I don't know a single one. Some of you out there probably know some. They're out there, right? The University of Southern New Hampshire State University, let's spend all of our tuition money on TV commercial people. They have all, they have tens and tens and tens of thousands of undergraduates, but almost all of them are non-traditional students, who are coming back to school or starting their undergraduate degrees when they're much older, right? Arizona State has an enormous online program. There's all sorts of for-profits that do it too. But this isn't something that most of your customers and most of my customers want themselves or want for their 18-year-olds. And so, I get that, we often refer to the 18-year-old population as the traditional age undergraduate population. In fact, it's the minority of people who are in college, who are starting at 18. Many more people start later on. But this is the market that we address, and among that market, I just don't see things changing all that much.
Right. Well, and I think you bring up a really good point that it is a part of the rite of passage. It's something that students look forward to and plan for. It's something families look forward to and plan for. And they do, it makes a lasting impact on their lives, as they move forward. So, bringing us back to the conversation of race, I think that ties into it again. I live in California, and California, basically bans the use of race in admissions at all the public institutions in California, which includes UCLA, UC Berkeley, all our University of California campuses. And the statistics show that this was in 1996, so this was over 30 years ago, the rate of marginalized populations really dropped. And I heard a statistic recently that said, just now are we getting to the point where we were in 1996? How scary is that? And yes, you can take into, at least with the Supreme Court decisions, I know with many of the college admissions people that I spoke of, they knew it was coming. It wasn't a big surprise. They all knew it was coming. But the big question was, what was the parameter? What was the scope? Is it going to be this narrow? Or are you going to have to redact the word of race out of every college application and essay? So fortunately, the essays can still mention, the students can still put in their life and their story and, their identity, but having that, being able to look at racial diversity and cultural diversity, if it's not race, then what other kinds of things, is going to be a part of that? But I'm afraid we are going to see, because a lot of the students are going to feel that they're not welcome. Just as the financial makes them feel not welcome, this is going to increase that presence and that. And so, as we look at that, here is an opportunity to take that financial and not only say, here's what the transparency of price is going to be, but here we're going to offer you certain things, but it can't be on race. So, it's like, well, what else can it be? right now, a lot of it's based on their zip codes. What have you found in that regard?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the people on this call are aware of this, but zip code +4, right? The postal code is an excellent proxy for household income, and all sorts of for-profit businesses figured this out a while ago. And direct marketing sort of thrives on the buying and selling of these names and addresses. Now, all of you know about how the College Board has traditionally sold names and addresses. Some of that side of their business is changing a little bit now, but I had you'll read about this in the New York Times sometime in the next couple of months. I had a pretty high achieving young woman, high school student in Ohio, keep all of her mail for me, all of her paper mail, and send it to me in a box. And her mom, sent me a note as they dropped it off at mailboxes, et cetera. She said, "Get ready." And I wasn't sure what she meant. But when it came, it weighed 45 pounds. So, this is still going on. But I think what you may not be aware of, or some of you may not be aware of if you haven't sort of been in the room and checked it out, Cyndy, it sounds like you have. So, I've gone and sat down with all of the enrollment management consulting firms, the big ones, that sort of sit behind the scenes and rent these pricing algorithms to just about every admissions and financial aid office in the country. And, they've essentially got these algorithms for rent where, I remember they have this incredible spreadsheet of every high school in the country that anybody at any of their client schools has ever applied from for admissions. And then they have ranked them all using a proprietary formula based on what happens to whether the kids from those high schools get in, whether they matriculate, and whether they persist, and how well they do when they persist. And that all goes into some magic math problem that, a whole bunch of propeller head PhDs at each of these firms has worked out. And they use that as one of, 50 to 100 different elements to kind of spit out a first offer for you after you've gotten in. And so zip code is absolutely a component of that. And I have no doubt that there are many schools out there who are who have traditionally been targeting high income areas where a family that earns $300,000 a year is not going to be willing to pay $80,000 a year to Connecticut College anymore. But if you pat them on the head with a $100,000 discount over 4 years, except you call it a presidential scholarship, that's going to feel pretty good in Wellesley, Massachusetts. That's going to feel good in Scarsdale and Highland Park, Illinois, right? Mercer Island, Washington. The parents can, sort of walk around saying, my kid got a 6-figure academic scholarship. And yet at $55,000, that family is still profitable for Connecticut College. And it's the algorithms that know that, right? So could you retune those algorithms to figure out where the most high achieving students of color are, and then pitch to them with a newly rebooted direct mail campaign that makes them feel like they've still got as good of a shot, of admission as they did before, and are welcome, and there's money waiting for them. Yeah, I think somebody's going to figure out how to do that really well. And it's a little bit of an arms race now. It's like, who's got the best algorithm? Who's got the best creative ideas? Who's got the biggest travel budget to, sort of go, wander around the country trying to find these folks? And And then we'll see what happens after that. I mean, presumably the schools with the biggest endowments and the biggest financial aid budgets are going to have the best shot at, maintaining their diversity numbers. But, somewhere down the food chain, there are going to be schools that do this really intelligently. And maybe they'll talk about how they did it. But my guess is that they won't, because people aren't going to be wanting to talk about anything. And the schools that manage to boost their the diversity of their populations are going to be suspect now. It's going to look like they're breaking the law. So I think the box is going to get blacker, right? This is going to be more opaque, but it's just hard to tell. I mean, it's sort of uncharted territory here.
Yeah, it just feels like we've gone backwards. Instead of forwards. And it's just kind of surprising that we're in this position. But, going back to the transparency, to be a little bit of the devil's advocate, if I'm applying to these colleges as a student, first of all, the college does have to admit me before they don't want to spend effort and things on me as a student until they know whether I'm admittable or not. And, how can they give me a price guarantee if they don't even know if I'm going to be admittable and if I will leave, and why give me all these numbers if I'm not going to matriculate, if I'm not going to say yes? So where in the part of that process does it make sense to bring all that in?
I guess here's what I'll say about that. They do it for athletes, and not just at the Division I level. Those of you who have clients who are in the Division III athletic recruitment rat race are probably very busy right now fielding phone calls from extremely confused families who did not understand just how aggressive and intense the process of doling out offers to Division III athletes would actually be. But this is like sort of high season for trying to figure out whether you're number 6 or number 2, on the priority list for the Colby College, field hockey coach. And the coach doesn't always tell you, but, maybe you get an offer, but it's going to explode in 5 days and you have to accept it. And like in that process, they're going to tell you, right? They're going to do a financial aid pre-read for you, if you happen to have need. And so if we can do it for, the special snowflake athletes, why can't we do it for everyone? Well, it turns out we can, right? Schools that are in a market position where they feel like transparency can set them apart have actually done this, right? They've done it at Whitman College. They've done it at College of Worcester. There are other schools that I believe will do it if you just call and ask, right? And not only will they do a more careful read of your need analysis than a net price calculator might do? They will also tell you, well, you will get no less than this amount of merit aid. And, with that in mind, you can make a better early decision, call, especially about whether to apply. But also, a call about whether if your kid were to get it in regular decision, whether it would actually be affordable. And that's really all people ask, right? And so, I do think it's possible to, further refine the net price calculator so that they offer guaranteed, so that they can offer guaranteed pricing. And if it means the estimate has to be a little bit higher just to give the school some, wiggle room on the back end, when they say the price will be no more than this, so be it, right? But this, hocus pocus mystery isn't good for anyone, right? Because, if you're a school and you're trying to fill, 60 or 70 or 80% of your class, in the last month or two before May 1st, it's sort of a crapshoot as to whether you're going to miss your number by, 5%, and 5% is like a budget crusher, right? So the schools want more predictability too. So, a lot of them throw their hands in the air and they say, well, you're not allowing for the possibility of the ground changes underneath us during the year. And, we don't really know what our applicant pool is going to be like. So how can we possibly, do our hand forged artisanal merit aid, evaluation process in October, when we can't measure people and against other people. And my response to that is, come on. You can maybe for the sort of full ride, scholarships that you offer, you need to wait and pit everybody against one another and, fly them all in, for a final round of interviews. But with everybody else, I look them in the eye and I say this, I know you're using an algorithmic formula. So why can't you use the algorithmic formula in October instead of in February, right? Yeah. And turns out that like a lot of places do, or, will do that if you ask. And then there are others that, that have grids, right? So, most of you probably have clients now that are at least looking at the University of Alabama, right? You just go to their Merit Aid page and they're like, all right, you got to go take the ACT 34, you've got to go take the ACT 34 times to get the 34 that will give you the biggest discount as an out-of-state student. And take it or leave it, right? And they actually maintained that during the pandemic. They were basically like, sort of flipping the bird to anybody in the North who couldn't, find their way to a test center or cared to, or who was physically, in a situation where they were vulnerable health-wise. School just didn't care, which is, gives you a good prediction about how they might treat your kid when they get there. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah.
Right. So we have a question that I think is pertinent to what we're talking about. Do you foresee any changes to the Merit Aid landscape? And we've sort of been talking about this, either the general practices or the basis for colleges award. Merit is difficult to predict and yet is often sought out. So people are looking for it. And, I think having that, being straight up front about the strategic enrollment management can be a big step toward that. Are there other things? You mentioned other schools that are doing it well. So are there other things that they're doing that could contribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had good news to report here. My sense of it is that, we're in a sort of stasis right now where there haven't really been any big movements on the Merit Aid front in the last 6 or 7 years. I think we talked before about how there's, whatever it is, 40 or so schools at the top of the food chain who do not have to discount for the affluent, which is, let's face it, what Merit Aid is in many instances. At number 41 is Connecticut College, which had to do it 6 or 7 years ago because they were in a weakening market position. They've got a geography problem there. It's not the most desirable area. They've got the small liberal arts college, return on investment kind of nonsense, which I actually don't believe in, but, people worry about the ability of the small liberal arts college to push students out into the world who are prepared for the workforce and can earn real money. They didn't really have any choice in the matter, but nobody else has gone over yet. I won't speculate on who I think is most vulnerable to potentially have to start doing it next. We've seen more, I think, of, Duke being aggressive with its full merit scholarships, trying to buy kids away from the Ivy League, and the University of Chicago doesn't do full rides, but they do a lot more $20,000 giveaways, each year than Duke does. And so, they're sort of nibbling around the edges in their own ways. I don't know that we're going to see seismic shifts there, but the thing that I keep an eye on is the discount rate, which something called the it's NACUBO, a National Association of College and University Business Officers, runs a sort of discounting study each year where they just say, okay, what's the net tuition revenue per student at your institution, and what percentage of, what percentage of that is that of the list price. And what they're finding is that, the discount rate last year, I think, grew to something like 59%. And so, we think the prices are going up, and the list prices are in fact going up, but a lot of people aren't paying those. And the people who aren't paying the list price, on an inflation adjusted basis, are paying roughly what they were paying, 10, 15, or 20 years ago. And that's because of all the merit aid. All right. And so colleges are just going to continue to discount to get the heads in the beds they need to keep the lights on. And so it's hard to imagine this going away. I mean, every year or two, you hear about some other school that, you've maybe heard of, but you haven't really sent a lot of kids there, doing what's known as a tuition reset, where they say, well, we're giving merit aid to 100% of our students. They may not realize it, right? They all feel good walking around, they've had their head patted and they've all won presidential scholarships, but they don't realize that everybody else has one. And rather than maintain that charade, they just cut the price by $15,000, $20,000. And then, they may look like more of a bargain, but the net price doesn't change, right? It's optics, and they hope that they're going to, attract more applicants if they do that. And sometimes it works, but a lot of schools that have tried it have just sort of reverted to ever higher prices. So, I wish I could say that things are going to be different or get more clear, but, I don't see a lot of evidence of it becoming easier to decipher for families.
Yeah. And it is a complicated situation, paying for college and all, return on the investment. You mentioned that, just, all those different terms are things that we hear and all have different meanings. And like colleges, I know here in California who have tried that, who've done the tuition reset and found their enrollment go down rather than go up because they were less expensive. So therefore the value of their education was perceived as less. And so then they had to raise their tuition up again, implement the merit aid because of the perception of, the value of the program. So any other observation or things that you especially since you've been reporting on this for a number of years and you report on finance in general, do you see a connection between, say, the financing of college and other aspects in people's lives?
Well, I think the one thing that became apparent to me when I was reporting my book, and has only been confirmed by the frustrating experience of now being a shopper myself with my wife and our older daughter, is that for all of the attention that we may bring in our lives to what cell phone plan to get or what washing machine to buy, the amount of consumer research and smart shopping that goes on in this industry, given the price tag and its importance, is just astonishingly low. And the deck really is stacked against lower or middle income families or just against the busy, right? Because, I feel pretty strongly that you can't really take the measure of these places without showing up in person, showing up on a day when school is in session, going to the tour, going to the info session, yes, but, eating in the dining hall, going to class, going out at night with an undergraduate to see what the social situation is like, among 2 or 3 other things, depending on your kid's interest. Mine is a modern dancer. And so she wants to see the facility. She wants to meet a professor. She ideally wants to sit in on a rehearsal. And all of a sudden, that's an 8 or a 10 or a 12-hour day. And these places aren't all in the same places, right? And so we really worked hard, starting in the spring break of her sophomore year, to have a 24-hour experience at a bunch of different places. And we're maybe going to get to 12, by the time she's ready to apply. And, and we were lucky enough to have, grownups with flexible schedules and, enough money to or frequent flyer miles to go and visit these places. And it's still not enough. And I'm like a quasi professional, right? So we don't shop for these places well enough. The system is not set up to allow us to shop well enough. The internet is no substitute, and it is intensely frustrating. And it feels like there ought to be a better way, but I don't know. I mean, we breathe some rarefied air in our household, and a lot of your clients probably do too. I get that, the vast majority of students in America go to college within, 100 or 200 miles of where they live. But your clients are probably a lot like my readers, and my readers are probably a lot like me. And, I don't feel like the people who are writing the biggest checks are shopping intelligently at all. And I'm finding it hard to do it myself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I bet. Well, it goes back to what we were saying. It feels like a rite of passage, right? And so there's a lot of emotion that goes with that. And you have these pictures of these experiences, media portrays college as being, or your college years as being XYZ. And so trying to find that ideal sometimes can be very challenging. But I think colleges in general, I know a lot more are, and I've done some reporting on colleges that are experiential and really emphasizing, and this has really become highlighted through after COVID, is having that student experience and what that looks like. And, one of the groups of colleges, and there are many others, but, we talk about the colleges that change lives, which is about 40 schools. Worcester, College of Worcester is in that group. I believe Whitman is too. But many other ones too. Like I visited Elon, they're very oriented toward experiential. Lynn University is oriented toward that. Many others are. And I think students and parents are starting to look for those things. And if we as college advisors and journalists can give families questions to ask at the admissions office, at the financial aid office, as parts of these things. And that's why, like, having the things that you put in your book and, that you write about and that we do are so have such an impact, because then we can start framing and redoing the narrative a little bit, because we do want to. I mean, our education system in the United States is still so much more accessible. There's so much more equity in our system than there is in many other countries. We haven't even addressed students coming from other countries, in light of some of the changes. So, so there's just so many ways that we can help and contribute to that. So somebody's asking about the FAFSA. So this had occurred to me. So I'm glad they bring it up. So, and I find it interesting because I've been doing this for so long. I've seen things come and go, and I'm sure you have too. So then we have a new FAFSA that's going to be launched this year. It's going to have a new term. Instead of estimated family contribution, it's going to be student aid index. Well, that's not new. And it's not going to be available until December. People are guessing. What?
At the earliest.
Exactly. I mean, like, it's going to be December 31st, just like Supreme Court hearing came out June 28th or whatever date. So do you see that as making impact? I mean, we're going from October to December. We used to have it in January. So again, that's nothing new. But what do you hear when people?
Well, look, I'm all for FAFSA simplification. It doesn't simplify things for anyone to drop it 2 or 3 months late. I think there's a non-zero chance that they will not make their December 1st deadline. And even with, a couple of months delay, I mean, it just throws financial aid offices into absolute chaos, right? It's probably not going to be glitch free. I mean, can you imagine the stampede of families hitting that website on December 1st? I mean, it's going to be like, trying to get PPP loans or something, or trying to get unemployment insurance during the pandemic. I don't trust the education department to get this right out of the gate. I think they probably should have pushed it another year. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, but I don't have any special knowledge. I'm just, skeptical that this is going to go well. Now, a year or two from now, when things are all settled in, I think this will, be easier for families. But, some of the information that's falling out is information that the private colleges and universities in particular value, right? So, will the CSS profile get more complicated as a result of this? I don't know, maybe. And, let's not forget that, the EFC or the SAI or whatever unfortunate acronym, comes next. That's one thing, but and many schools will continue to sort of take that as the bottom line when considering how many of their own institutional resources to hand out. There will be hundreds of schools that continue to do their own thing and make their own rules and have rules that look more like the rules under the old FAFSA than the new one. I'm thinking in particular about the ways in which the new FAFSA is going to allow all sorts of grandparent shenanigans to go on, even more than they used to, in terms of, kids qualifying for aid, but grandparents still managing to, pay a bunch of money towards school. The private colleges and universities are totally onto that and trying to put a stop to it, by asking pointed questions on their forms about exactly what kind of help they're getting, if any, and essentially forcing people to either come clean or lie and risk, committing fraud. So I'm watching the grandparent situation with a close eye, but also just the question of, how logistically difficult this launch is going to be, assuming it happens in 2023 at all.
Yeah, no, I having been in technology, I know how difficult it is to launch something new. And we all lived through the Common App when they redid that. And that was not nearly as heavy of a lift as this is going to be. I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be a mess. I just don't see it being a real smooth thing. They've had so little time and so many little resources put through it. It's not something you can just do at once. So yeah, I think it's going to affect financial aid offers. They're going to be later. They're not going to be as complete or as final. I think a lot more colleges are going to go to profile. There's talk about a profile light. So I think we're going to see that. Well, thank you very much. One last real quick question, and I'm just going to kind of condense this a little bit. Elizabeth asks, do you believe need bind exists?
I shared the skepticism that I think is imbued in that question. It is rare that, the average aid package or the percentage of students on aid, even at the need blind meets full need schools, it's rare that changes all that much from year to year. Although, do keep in mind that a change of a couple of percentage points is actually millions and millions of dollars to these schools. So, it matters. So all the more reason to assume that they actually are keeping a close eye on it. But I guess I want to believe that the answer is yes. Some of it's just math, right? If you've got to stuff your class with athletes who are disproportionately wealthy, legacy cases disproportionately wealthy, development cases who are obviously disproportionately wealthy, there's only so much room that's left for people with need, right? And so I sort of feel like the math just kind of falls out somewhat naturally from there. So I want to believe that the answer is yes, that, the people who work in these offices are principled, and they may have constraints, but I do believe need blinds exist. Now the question of how these schools meet full need, there are, very much differences, between the schools, even the ones that claim to meet full need. So I don't know if there are shenanigans going on, it's probably on, how they meet need as opposed to whether they're need blind.
Right. Well, and the other part of this, and I agree with you. I think, and going back to the values and, looking at education and trying to bring in a whole diverse class. But the question then becomes that she asked, and I hear this all the time, is there's a question on the Common App or any application, are you applying for financial aid? And sometimes people feel like, oh, if I put yes, then I won't get in because, if I put no and then they're need blind, then I'll get in. I am of the opinion that why would you want to get into a school you can't afford? So if you need financial aid, write it down. And if they don't accept you because you need financial aid, then you're better off. That approach has never made any sense to me whatsoever. But I'm not an affluent parent in a highly sought after zip code either.
Yeah, I mean, there are marginal cases where people would probably qualify for $5,000 or $10,000 of grant aid at a, super selective or at a reasonably selective private college that is need aware, right? Maybe the first 80% of the class is filled with people regardless of need, and then they have to consider how much need people have and may reject the people who have need, right? So I can see where you would just suck the $5,000 or $10,000 up for the chance to go to this school that's the school of the kids' dreams, or maybe you get in and then you apply for aid for sophomore, junior, senior year. So there are people who try and game it that way, but those are more marginal cases, I think.
Yeah. So, Ron, thank you so much. And we will watch for your articles and these other things that you're working on, and we'll watch as things unfold over the next few months. It's not going to be it's going to be very exciting and interesting, and we all have a contribution to make. So thank you for your contribution.
Yes, and thank you. On that note, the questions that I get most often, both relating to my newspaper work and in the wake of my book, the questions are way more often about merit aid than they are about anything else. So much so that I developed an online course for parents who want to spend 3 or 4 hours just going deep on this and really understanding the technicalities of how all this works, and the medium amount of predictability that there actually is if you dig in on some of the numbers. So anyway, that course is going to debut in the next month or two. If you sign up for email at ronlieber.com, you'll get a note when it happens, and I'm going to try and do some sort of free look, or maybe even a free subscription to the course for independent college counselors, so that they can offer discount codes to their clients or something along those lines. I'm still working it out. But anyway, you won't see it on ronlieber.com yet. But if you sign up over on the right to get email from me, I will let you know about it when it's ready to go.
That sounds great. I know it's something you've been working on, so I'm so excited to see that you're going to have that, and just let us know, and then we'll be able to get that word out. So thank you again. Thank you I've watched the sun go down behind you. I can see that it's totally dark. So and thanks everyone for being here, as being part of this UCLA summer series. We also want to again thank the Dean's Office for sponsoring this. There are 2 more episodes, conversations that are going to be held, one later in July, one in August, just with different panels. So thank you again, Ron. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today. This does conclude our In Conversation with Ron Lieber. So
thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.